He's coming to you through your computer or phone, from NotAPipe HQ with a guest all alone. He's nobody's hero, tried to run for the hills, but now he's back and tilting at windmills. Writers not writing, just people getting by. And maybe we're all crazy thinking this is gonna fly. But maybe we can learn to make the world a better place. Take a break, have a laugh at a stupid face.
Hail and well met Slayers of Giants. Welcome to all of you who've jumped in because of the Brickgate drama. If you enjoyed the introduction of the mustachioed evil wizard Fenkum in the last chapter, you're really going to like some of the characters in this one. A friend reached out today to let me know she wasn't aware we'd even come back from Spain. If you want a more fun version of the rundown of everything that's happened since Spain, go back all the way to chapter 1. For those of you who are just jumping in now, this novel, working title Tilting at Windmills, just like the show, is told by an omniscient third-person narrator telling the story of a writer named Benjamin. This Benjamin character is clearly fictional because, in the universe of the story, he starts off so beaten down by the situation in which he finds himself that he effectively breaks with reality and invents a hallucination, Lord Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi, a knight-errant and warrior mage who is a modern analog of Cervantes' Don Quixote, only unlike Don Quixote, who is crazy, Rolando is sane and correct about living in a world of hidden magic, and we are all crazy for not being able to see the forces at work all around us. Rolando has taken on a squire, Serge Sanchez, and then Serge was knighted by the goddess of Lake Erie, so he's now Sir Sanchez of the town of Eels, guardian of justice and protector of mermaids. And he got a familiar, like Rolando, only Rolando's is a raven and Serge's familiar is a red panda. Yeah, a lot has happened since January. Before I begin, thank you all for the overwhelming support as we battle a corporation that made it clear they want to make our lives shit. They are still trying, and they have often succeeded. Our attorney has, let's just say, strongly advised us against sharing anything specific about our situation. But I don't even have to mention the corporation because you know who I'm not talking about. Hassan Piker knows who I'm not talking about.
And people were saying that the previous bookstore, the previous owners of Bricks and Minifigs were like publishing anarcho-communist books and stuff. So
what?
That tracks. They look the part.
That's crazy.
They do look the part. I'm judging books by the cover, man. I'm doing it. I'm judging all the books by all the covers.
One of my favorite comedians, comedian Josh Johnson, knows who I'm not talking about.
I know. And so he has an agreement, a consignment agreement with a franchise of Bricks and Minifigs. And so Bricks and Minifigs, the franchisee, or E, I don't know business, but basically the person that works at Bricks and Minifigs, whose store it is, they make a deal with him. Hey, we'll put your Legos in our store, put them on display, and then when they sell, we'll cut you 65% and we'll take the other 35% for our trouble trying to sell it for you. And then he apparently was like, they were just in my basement, so yes, I would like very much start selling them. And so then everything's well and good. Everything's going fine, you know? He gets some money every once in a while. People are coming in. Wow, Star, but like older and in pristine condition. These Legos had not been played with. Then this franchise, they lose their franchising license. They get shut down by corporate and someone else comes in. Now this new person that comes in tells her, the woman who owned the franchise, look, you gotta be out by tonight, all right? And then she was like, that's impossible because I'm still working on inventory. Also, we have this deal with this guy and we give him 65%. We keep 35. He's got all these Star Wars Legos in here. It's worth in the six figures. And they tell her, hey, that's not really your problem anymore because you don't work here anymore because it's our store now. So some time passes. And then this guy realizes I haven't gotten some money in a while. And Mandalorian's out. They got that Groot movie, like something should be happening. There's interest. And so he checks in with the store, and the store is like, who are you? And he's like, I have an agreement with y'all. His son, I believe, shows up to the store and is like, hey, we have an agreement where we have some of our Legos here. When we sell them, y'all cut us a check and everything. And they were like, we don't know you. And he was like, well, I know the agreement isn't with you specifically, but it was with this franchise and it was with the last person who you took over from. Yeah, but we don't know you. And he was like, okay, you may not know me, but like, I need to get back there, check the inventory, see what's ours. We'll just take home what's ours. And they were like, yeah, we don't know you. Those are our Legos now. And so then they get into this, what you would kind of call a legal battle, but not quite yet. It actually took a YouTuber named Reckless Ben to get involved. And Reckless Ben was trying everything possible to get these people their money. Things I would have never thought of. He was trying to get them to sue him just to get them in court so he could serve them their lawsuit because they were impossible to serve. I don't know if you've ever been served before, but they usually just walk up and they ask you your name. And when you say your name because you're you,
the debit card that plays by your rules. Earn up to 5% cash back with unlimited cashback offers. No monthly fee, no minimum balance.
They usually just walk up and they ask you your name, and when you say your name because you're you, they're like, you've been served, and boom, there it is. But they were, these guys, these two dudes who took over, they were crafty. Ben was doing all the right things through the court, but then he literally shows up to a store. They had and closed the store down. They went ahead and closed the store just so they couldn't be served. And then he went to their house and they called the police. And look, here's the thing. You gotta understand, I'm watching this whole thing unfold as a black person in America. And it is a wild ride to watch white people call the cops multiple times on white people. It's great. Every time Ben tried to serve them or tried to get somebody else to serve them, they would call the police on Ben. So then Ben finally was talking to the police and was like, well, can you serve them? I mean, you the police. And it started to feel like there was a bit of a conspiracy afoot because the police always seemed to be on these guys' side initially, right off the bat. Turns out that one of these guys is high up in the Mormon church. Now, this is happening. Yeah, this is happening in, like, I guess, a Mormon community. And so some of the police officers are also in the Mormon church. So then there's speculation that the police are all in on it together to try to help out this guy because they're all Mormons. Which you wouldn't think would have anything to do with anything. But apparently, according to some people, it very much has everything to do with everything because then this dude is over here calling the police and the police are showing up like they work for him. And so it turns out that one of the guys that owned this franchise, that did this stuff to this man, is named Josh Johnson. Look, you try to do everything you can to be like a good person and stuff. You do your best, but woof. It doesn't help when this type of stuff is out there.
This guy knows who I'm not talking about, though unfortunately I'm not sure what he's saying.
Bricks and minifigs 就能在其中提成一部分。因为价值20万的乐高数量极其庞大。
Perhaps he's saying, though the wheels of justice turn slowly both in the formal court system and in the court of public opinion, when the verdict comes down, it falls fast, and it seems, at least for now, like the court of public opinion has ruled decisively. As we continue to fight in the formal system, Your support, whether that's through our GoFundMe, or likes and encouraging comments on videos, or raising your voices on your own platforms, has made an incredible difference. A year ago, we felt completely alone in this and thought we'd never see a bit of justice. We couldn't even find a lawyer to take our case because even though they agreed we had the law on our side and a ton of evidence, they felt like the value of a little store in Salem, Keizer, Oregon was just too small to be worth their time. Well, thanks to you, that little hole-in-the-wall store is a global news story. There might be a few lawyers out there kicking themselves for turning us away now. So thank you, whether you are CoffeeZilla, or a commenter I didn't get to thank personally, a GoFundMe donor, or a person who has told a friend, have you heard about this Brickgate thing? A die-hard brickhead, or someone who hasn't built with Lego since childhood. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, back to our story. And as I remind everyone each week, this is just a draft. It can still be changed before it gets compiled into the novel you will hold in your hands. So if you notice anything, a typo in the text on my Patreon or Substack, a continuity error, a huge structural change you'd recommend, I appreciate any and all feedback. So put that in the comments wherever you're finding this, and I'll wrangle all those notes into my document that I use as I edit the final version. Well, that was a lot of ado this week. So without furthering that, here's Chapter 21 of Tilting at Windmills. Tilting at Windmills, Chapter 21. Rescued When All Seems Lost. The author Douglas Copeland once described the period of anticipation before the launch of his novels as the calm before the calm. The phrase stuck in Benjamin's mind, and he'd experienced it many times as a writer, but it had bled over into other areas of his life. He'd convinced himself some forthcoming event would be a breakthrough, and find it was simply the next step in a long process, or a nothing burger, or a slight disappointment. And then, when he couldn't predict it, something would change dramatically. Someone would show up and change the story. Something would explode. Like many authors, Benjamin had tended to the fantasy his debut novel would break through and launch his writing career. That had been almost a decade earlier. He'd known the statistical probability. He'd lectured about it to students, both in high school classes and adults in writing conferences. Once the people who are already successful in other fields are eliminated from the list, the number of people making a healthy, stable living writing fiction in the United States is smaller than the number of players in the NBA. Even though those athletes, like the successful authors living in this country, come from all over the world, there are almost 1 million people in the US for every one of them. So the odds of making it big as a novelist are roughly 1 in a million, essentially equal to becoming a professional basketball player. And yet, just like every 10-year-old sinking her first three-pointer and dreaming of her NBA start, authors imagine they will be one of the lucky few. Benjamin would assure his students there is no shame in this kind of dreaming. Practice the literary equivalents of your passing and dribbling and shooting. Learn to be a good teammate to your writer colleagues. Daydream your Pulitzer acceptance speech while you write. But don't take time out of your writing to draft it. Do the work. Use it as locker room pinup fuel. But understand, the very fact that you can identify Harper Lee as the example of someone who got her debut novel in the hands of every ninth grader in the nation makes her the exception which proves the rule. And yet, dreams are persistent things, and stronger for professional dreamers. Before Benjamin's first book launch party, he'd ordered way too many books, and he sold out. He asked friends and family to take pictures of themselves holding copies of the novel and received them from 4 continents. It seemed like a solid start because it was. It was also the calm before the calm. A good start can be both. Later that year, he'd set out in the hot sun at a book festival with only a single product, just one title, copies of a lonely book stacked up in front of an oversized promotional poster, and he wouldn't sell a single copy. Over time, he'd learned this is the way of things, feast and famine. But that first bomb event felt like a terrible defeat. The calm before the calm resolving, not in an exciting storm crashing on rocky shores or a vista of a sunlit beach, but a fog on the water and no wind for the sails, interminable and seemingly endless. Of course, a truism hides in the words describing the notion of the infinite. Even strung together, a perpetual, unceasing, eternal endlessness can only last so long. The decimals of pi may tick into infinity, but the circle they describe is closed, complete, bounded. Perhaps in roughly 10 to the 78th power years, at the heat death of the universe, the remaining matter will achieve a state of stasis. But for the next quintivigtillion years, nothing lasts forever, including nothing itself. Staring from a distance at waves rolling in creates the illusion of a kind of consistency. As his novels came out, each would revive his hopes, they'd find a large audience. Then each would sink back into obscurity under the weight of the ocean of other, better books. The pull of the moon's gravity, the salty brine of reality. Benjamin knew enough about the market to maintain more stoic expectations about his books of poetry, but when his only book of nonfiction, a short volume explaining his reasons for leaving the United States, caught a zeitgeisty moment and flashed briefly on some prominent lists, he caught the attention of major news outlets, mostly in Spain and the UK. A few strangers recognized him from pictures in the newspaper and greeted him on the streets of Barcelona. This was as close as he'd come to anything approaching virality. And then, after the crash, the shamefaced return to the United States, the brief period of couch surfing and abject hopelessness, the near divorce and reconciliation, and his relocation to Portland, the story of the seizure of the store he'd owned with Chris suddenly broke through, thanks to a wildly popular YouTube documentary. Of course, within any group of people, outliers will speak out. Gods bless them for their contrarianism. Some hostile to the popular consensus on principle, others seeing the opportunity for attention by taking the wildest view. But these were so few and far between, Benjamin and Chris were generally able to maintain hopeful attitudes as the story went viral. They entertained each other by articulating the most absurd conspiracy theory, that they'd somehow concocted an elaborate plan to have their own store taken from them, ruin their own lives, try and fail to relocate to Spain, and have to restart their lives and marriage from scratch, all in an effort to sell 2 or 3 copies of Benjamin's books to the YouTubers, purchasing them to sound prepared when they had them on to talk about something completely unrelated to Benjamin's literary ambitions. As Benjamin told a fellow small press publisher colleague, if the whole thing had been a marketing strategy, it was the worst he could think of, especially in an age when people could make whole careers out of spewing hate speech. Getting attention for being awful was easy. Getting attention by tricking a corporation into stealing from you, somehow engineering a situation where they would threaten to make your life shit, and would quite successfully follow through before being found out, that was not winning at 4D chess. It was shooting dice in an alley with the wrong people and getting mugged. Chris and Benjamin could have been offended someone would suspect they'd engineered the mugging to get their bloodied faces in the newspaper, but the whole notion was so absurd, they chose to laugh about it. And predictably, the same people who watched a mugging and saw a plot interpreted Benjamin and Chris's bloodied smiles as more evidence. Kurt Vonnegut described this extreme degree of absurdity best in Slaughterhouse-Five. So it goes. In the midst of this attention to their case, Chris heard from another YouTuber. Chris recognized his name because their kid was a huge fan of his work, and people in the comments on the original documentary kept referencing him. So when his message popped up in her phone, she surprised her coworkers by shouting, "Oh shit!" Benjamin hadn't heard of the gentleman before, so he went back and watched a bunch of his videos to prepare himself. When Chris and Benjamin sat for their first interview, and the host was generous enough to include their kid because they really wanted to get to meet him, he convinced them to share all the photographic evidence they'd been holding on to for their lawsuit against Megacorp. Then he asked them not to mention they would be on his show and to keep the pictures close until his video appeared. Benjamin's intrinsic inclination to overshare at every opportunity chafed at being even temporarily silenced, but he agreed to the professional courtesy, though he couldn't help but ask a few more times than he should have when the video would go live. The YouTuber, both because he made extremely high-quality, thoroughly produced videos, and because details kept coming to light over the course of production, had to delay the release and give up a lot of sleep to get the thing put together. And then it dropped. Even as it was siloed in the YouTuber's Patreon, it garnered a great deal of attention. But when the bay doors opened, and the revelations encased in all that carefully manufactured production smashed into the surface of the platform's 2.58 billion monthly active users, it exploded. 300,000 people watched in the first hour. 1.5 million in the first 6 hours. More than 5 million people saw it in the first 2 days. Benjamin's own response video garnered more than 50,000 views in the same 2 days. And the outpouring of support overwhelmed him. Like in Spain, total strangers recognized Chris on the street, but an order of magnitude more frequently. It seemed every time Benjamin talked with a friend, they knew about the situation already, sometimes with details he hadn't learned yet. All this was happening as the President of the United States, in an effort to distract from a bombshell report in the conservative-leaning Wall Street Journal about his staff's plotting to hide his sex crimes with a convicted child sex trafficker, went on TV to announce a negotiated settlement with the Iranian government was imminent, for the 39th time. And, in the same interview, conducted on a channel which described itself in court as entertainment, but tricked its viewers into believing it was a journalistic enterprise, the president bragged about military strikes against civilian infrastructure, a clear war crime under international law. The magical curse besetting the United States was so firmly entrenched that what was effectively an announcement of "we have always been at war with East Asia," to distract from revelations of a conspiracy to hide testimony from an investigation of the president's repeated pedophile sexual assaults, somehow got less attention than Megacorp's theft of Benjamin and Chris's store. Those global war crimes and disgusting sexual crimes were now so de rigueur that Megacorp's thefts were seen as more interesting and palatable examples of bullying. Also, Megacorp's actions could produce more outrage because hating Megacorp was nonpartisan. As a side note, a sad little man with a hoarding problem managed to amass the most wealth any human has ever hoarded in history, an achievement which would somehow be higher up in his obituary than his choice to starve and kill 14 million people around the world. One of those achievements made the front page of the New York Times. The other, mostly buried in comment sections, caused magically cursed Americans to yawn. Lord Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi, because he was temporarily living in the United States and was researching the magical curse besetting the country, felt obliged to keep up on its news, so each day he skimmed the Times, the Journal, the Post, and the local Oregonian, in addition to his home countries El País and La Vanguardia, and his favorite newspaper, only in part because of its name, The Guardian. He felt appropriately outraged by America's appalling behavior at home and abroad, and he took notes about the major events in his little black hardcover moleskin notebook, where he accumulated evidence to bolster or eliminate his various theories about the curse's source. Sir Sanchez of the town of Eels, on the other hand, was an American adult, and therefore influenced by the curse on their nation, such that, even after his discovery of the reality of magic and his knowledge of the curse itself, he still couldn't bring himself to care much about any given day's news. Lord Orlando recognized this, and occasionally used his former squire as an unwitting test subject. While Sir Sanchez busied himself with his studies of the lore of various knights-errant and the collection of spells he dutifully copied into his grimoire, Rolando would look over the top of his phone and share some bit from the news from one of the papers to measure Serge's reaction. "Yeah, I don't pay attention to politics," Serge said. Rolando hummed. "Interesting." And he added some notes into his little book. "What?" Serge asked, looking up from his work. "Why is that interesting?" They sat in their chairs on the roof of the condominium complex, enjoying an unusually warm and dry afternoon for a Portland May, but Serge suddenly found the sun's rays oppressive, his t-shirt too sweaty for the topic of the conversation. "Are you aware that's a very strange reaction to this news?" "I think it's pretty normal. Most people don't like to think about it." He felt the moisture in his armpits. "It stresses me out." Yes, I understand it is a stress-inducing," Rolando said. "But I can assure you, this is not a normal reaction, at least not outside the United States. You can see how, if everyone has this response, well, it may protect them from some discomfort. Individually, it does nothing to change the source of the stress you all live under constantly, yes?" "But what's the point of worrying about it if you can't do anything about it?" "Do you not hear your own fatalism? You have decided in advance that nothing can be done. You would not do the same if your mechanic told you your automobile needed significant repair work, or your doctor informed you about a tumor growing in your body. You would not say nothing can be done. Even though you could not solve these problems by yourself, you would immediately seek out the help to solve them, yes? Well, sure, but... Yet when I tell you the vice president of your country, a man so desperate to gain attention that he will cross any moral line, fought for a chance to go on a former game show host's podcast to create a distraction to hide evidence that his boss, another former game show host, raped children. That same president bragged about dropping $250 million of bombs in a single night on water treatment facilities, poisoning the water of millions of innocent people with your tax dollars. You waved this away. Do you not find that odd, Sir Sanchez? Serge shrugged. Well, politicians are all bastards on both sides of the aisle. Rolando frowned and added another note to his book, then said, That may be the case, but can you see how, if everyone adopts that same attitude, it protects the bastards from any consequences? If you had to guess, would you suspect this attitude is common in your country? What, that politicians are sleazeballs, or that there's nothing we can do about it? Both. I think this is a single attitude expressed in two ways. Serge nodded contemplatively. Yeah, I think that's how most people feel. And this does not strike you as odd? It just makes sense, Rolando. People feel like there's no point in caring because they have seen that nothing really changes. And yet, is it possible that nothing really changes precisely because so many people feel there is no point in caring? I can see where you're going with this, but... And then Serge noticed which notebook Rolando kept jotting notes in. Wait, you think it's part of the curse? Exactly, my friend. This is how the curse does its work. Your country watches as 20 first graders are killed in one of your schools and says, nothing can be done about this. Or as 21,000 children are killed with American bombs in Palestine and says, it's a complicated situation. Your country was the first and only to put a human on the moon by non-magical means, yet you see these, the most obvious injustices, the murders of children, which no one can defend, and you do nothing. Of course it is the curse, Sir Sanchez. Wait, the first by non-magical means? Now it was Rolando's turn to shrug. I have read about wizards who attempted to teleport themselves to the moon. They may have succeeded, but they were never heard from again, presumably because they froze and suffocated upon arrival. Magic can do incredible things, but it can also be too hasty. Remember how I taught you to keep your sword in its scabbard for as long as possible before entering combat? This is doubly important for teleportation. He shook his head vigorously. But don't change the subject, Sir Sanchez. I am not saying confronting these problems will be simple, but when your John Kennedy pledged to put a man on the moon, the project was not completed for 8 years, 1 month, and 26 days. Serge raised his eyebrows. That's a very specific accounting, Rolando. I followed the story closely. Quite exciting. I was a younger man then, only 71 years old when Kennedy made his announcement. I followed the story avidly in the Spanish newspapers and watched the landing with a group of friends on what was, at the time, considered a large and quite expensive black and white television. We had no idea the United States was already under the sway of the curse which still afflicts this country. We thought, what's next? What can't they do, these estadounidenses? Perhaps cure all disease? End world hunger? Bring about peace on earth? And what have you done since then, Sir Sanchez? How many wars have you fought? Have you started since the last time an American stood on the surface of the moon? Perhaps Garibaldi of Gaul could answer this question. I cannot know, just from what I read in the papers. As many secret wars as the public ones? Who can say? This is part of the curse, Sir Sanchez. Not the wars themselves. Governments around the world start wars. The curse is that you Americans no longer care. You do not even have the ability to care, it seems. You wave them away, dismiss the actions of your own government as though they work for someone other than you, and nothing can be done about it. But what can we do? Think of a knocking in your car's engine, a strange lump in your skin. He waved a hand at the street below him. A pothole in the road. You would not start from the predisposition the problem is intractable. You would seek to solve the problem. He clapped his book closed. tucked it into his pants pocket, and stood quickly, surprising Serge.
And this is what we must do. We cannot wait around to find this wizard, Fenkum. We must seek him out, and end this curse which infects even you, Sir Sanchez.
Serge rose more slowly. Okay, he said, his voice full of uncertainty. He didn't like the idea he was a victim of the curse he sought to cure, but because of the curse, he couldn't focus on the way it affected him. As Rolando approached the door to the stairway down to their hall on the top floor, Serge called after him. Hey, have you heard about this story about Megacorp and the store just south of here? The whole internet is obsessed with it. Rolando only half turned and didn't break stride.
Not as important as the curse upon the land, Sir Sanchez. Stay focused. Come. I do not like waiting to hear from my contacts. I am restless. I don't have answers, but we must seek out those who may have some. Waiting to be rescued suddenly feels far too American.
As they grabbed their swords in the condo, Rolando shouted a pointless command to their roommates not to kill one another or destroy anything in their absence. Brianna, the Anhana, appeared in the sink and chirped her assent. Mukadi, the djinn Rolando had trapped in a maglite flashlight, shouted, "Go fuck yourself, old man!" Kudori Nuzzleshead, the duende living in Serge's closet, laughed so loudly it was clearly forced. Rolando and Serge ignored them all and headed down to the building's garage. Once Serge started his car engine, he turned to his passenger. Okay, where to?
I do not know. Let's just drive around a bit until something reveals itself.
With these gas prices, there's a war in Iran going on, in case you hadn't heard. I'm not living under a rock. I know how much it costs to fill this thing up.
Rolando frowned at him. I am a lord with intergenerational wealth. This is a business expense, my friend. Trust me, I guarantee we will either find something or return home having chewed on some time, and either is preferable to waiting.
Eaten up time, Serge corrected.
Why up, do you think? Food is not above us when we eat, and time is not up or down. Your language is quite difficult to understand.
Serge couldn't argue against that. Without entering a destination in his phone, he pulled out onto the same road where Chris and Benjamin lived. A few blocks down the street, he passed their apartment on the opposite side, unaware of the relationship between his mentor in the passenger seat and the writer living mere feet from the passing car. Rolando didn't feel the slightest twinge as he passed his progenitor, but a few blocks later he said,
"Let's make a right at this light."
3 blocks after the turn, he saw a parking lot which somehow felt promising.
There, let's park.
Serge did, then stepped out into the warm sunlight. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Koman Sawanarat, his red panda familiar, hop through the rear passenger door. The red panda had acclimated quickly to its ability to pass through solid matter at will, but it couldn't overcome its somewhat ungainly and adorable waddling pace. Serge nodded to the ghostly creature, then turned back to Rolando, speaking over the hood of the car. "What are we looking for?" he asked.
"Something is strange,"
Rolando said, scanning the parking lot. Serge did a slow pirouette. On the street level, a mural recalling the Black Lives Matter protest took up half the face of the building to their south, the other half decorated with a mural of roses and the faces of 3 puppies, possibly related to the deli in some way Serge could only guess. The corners of the streets in that part of Old Town were the same gas lamp variety visible in other parts of the city, but painted bright red and sporting red traditional Chinese paper lamps as well. The building to their east had the hexagonal windows and tiled roof marking it as the heart of Portland's Chinatown. To their northeast, a block away, a large billboard clung to the 3rd story of a brick building, showing rainbow children's hands waving in a field of similarly colorful butterflies, next to aggressively red letters encouraging everyone to rise against hate. And on the northwest corner, a giant sculpture of the flower of a pitcher plant, one of the 4 in the Nepenthes series by the artist Dan Cohen, stood unlit in the midday sun. By night, the 17-foot-tall sculpture would be illuminated from within and glow in brilliant colors, but Serge didn't know that. The blue TriMet Max train rolled by to the west, greeting everyone with its signature low double-beeping hello, and drawing Serge's eye back to the deli covered in giant roses. He described what he saw to himself as much as to Rolando. Lots of art, lots of Subarus, maybe an overrepresentation of people of indeterminate gender, people who may be homeless and may just be dressed very casually. It all looks pretty normal Portland. This is just home. But his volume dropped off as he noticed a U-Haul truck parked in front of the deli. Normally, a nondescript U-Haul truck wouldn't have garnered more than a glance, not even enough attention to enter his description of his surroundings. But because he'd been paying attention to the online saga of Benjamin and Chris's stolen store, and because the existence of a U-Haul truck had been one of the many points of contention, it caught his eye. Since watching those videos, and the dramatic discovery of the U-Haul in question, Serge had been noticing U-Hauls like a person who'd just bought a blue car and started seeing them everywhere. As he watched, someone yanked the back door open with unusual force, a black rectangle of darkness appearing like an opening mouth. The sparse collection of passers-by might have noticed a door opening on its own and revealing an empty interior, but Serge recognized the signature shimmer of magic before Koman could even raise its hands in alarm to warn him. The air around the open rear of the U-Haul wavered as the occupants exited, as though they were being farted out of the truck. On instinct, Serge stepped around to the back of the car, opened the trunk, and grabbed his sword by the scabbard, all the while staring at the creatures crossing the street and entering the parking lot. He had some difficulty making them out because they were partially obscured by the plethora of Subarus, and they rose and descended as they approached, sometimes as high as 9 feet in the air, then low enough they were beneath the tops of the hatchbacks. All 5 of the creatures were naked and, from the waist up, looked mostly human, with similar body types, slightly distended bellies and drooping breasts hinting at pregnancies long ago, muscular arms, and long straight black hair flashing behind them as they came. But their faces looked so much like masks, Serge thought they might be until he could make out their movements, their lower jaws opening to allow their forked tongues to flick out and taste the air, their bulging eyes roving around the lot under brows which moved slightly as well. These mask-like faces were different colors, completely clashing with their pale skin. One was bright red, another black, another sickly green, the fourth dark blue, and the fifth a burnt orange. Each of the creatures had a pair of horns growing out of its forehead, but they were different lengths and widths, the pair rising out of the black mask-like face by at least a foot, and so thin they looked like the teeth of some fish living in the deepest part of the ocean. The red mask face sporting a pair that were only an inch long and just as wide. All the creatures had mouths which opened almost all the way to their jaw muscles, and when they opened them to flick their tongues, Serge could see a flash of white, sharp teeth, even from across the parking lot. While their heads were frightening, Serge focused on 2 other features, which were more obviously dangerous. The reason the creatures rose and fell so dramatically from the waist up as they moved was because they didn't run on legs. From the waist down, they slithered on the tails, torsos and tails, of snakes. He couldn't tell how long their bodies were from his vantage point, but he estimated the tails were at least 4 times as long as the upper torsos, and they propelled the creatures over the pavement between the cars with shocking speed. Equally concerning, each of the creatures carried a katana, the unsheathed blade flashing in the sun, the scabbard held in the creature's other hand like a second weapon. Rolando had a third concern, which eclipsed Serge's worry about the swords and tails, but he didn't have time to explain fully. "Hanyas," he barked. "They are the spirits of women who died filled with jealousy and rage because they had been spurned by their lovers. If they repress all their feelings in life, and then die with all that rage exploding out of them, they can be reanimated as Hanyas after death with evil magic. Most common in Japan because of sexism and high shame culture, but they can be found anywhere." "So, is this a case where we unsheathe our swords now, or?" Rolando only had time to answer by holding a warning hand out in Serge's direction and keeping his own sword sheathed in the other, because the creatures quickly surrounded them, slithering up onto the tops of cars and rising as high as the sculpture of the Nepenthes flower across the street. But rather than standing with a kind of sensual dignity like the flower sculpture, these creatures loomed over the knights errant, forming a dome of hungry malice. Without turning to look at its companions, one of the creatures, the one with the dark orange face, said, "Sisters, can we tell them who sent us?" The olive green-faced one spoke through its elongated smile. "We're not supposed to, but—" The shiny onyx-faced continued the thought. "There's no harm in it once they're dead, and—" The bright red-faced one finished it. "And we do love a bit of extra betrayal." "So delicious," the navy blue-faced one editorialized. "Esteemed ladies," Rolando said, "we would very much like to hear what you have to share. even if it is only to go to our graves, overcome by bitterness. But first, if I may have a brief word with my companion." He leaned toward Serge, held up his cane, and whispered a pair of sentences into the skull of Poe. The raven, circling overhead, glowed brightly enough for Serge to see it clearly, and it briefly cawed a lonely song off the buildings and pavement. Serge, expecting some advice in English, felt the spells like a soft tingling, the sensation of a bug caught in his arm hair, only all over his body for the briefest moment. And then the world around him shifted. The leaves on the nearby tree made the same soft whoosh in the wind, but they suddenly slowed, and the wind itself maintained the power to move them, though it too slowed.
"He dares to interrupt the delivery of our news, sisters," the creature with the olive green face said.
But its voice, previously hissed out in a normal clip, now slogged through each syllable like it had consumed a spoonful of syrup. "Holy shit, Rolando, what did you do to me?" Serge said, and he heard his own voice zipping back to his ears like the voiceover in a medication commercial informing viewers that in very rare cases, swelling between the genitals and anus may lead to severe complications and even death, without tainting the perception that the pills will cause the viewers to look and feel like the happy models who have been blessedly relieved of their minor ailments. Rolando lowered his head slightly and spoke in a hushed voice, which sounded like it came out at the normal speed, and it took Serge a moment to realize the older knight had accelerated his own speech to match Serge's perception of the world.
"I will explain later, if possible. We must try not to fight these creatures. If we do enter glorious combat, defend yourself as well as you can, and make your way toward the river."
He pointed to the east down Davis Street with his eyes.
"If I fall, run and dive into the water."
Wait, what?" Serge said, still hearing himself at the accelerated pace.
"My deepest apologies,"
Rolando said to the creatures above them. His voice had returned to its normal sonorous pace, and Serge heard it slowed like the Hanyas. To the magical creatures, it sounded normal, if a bit pompous and presentational.
"Forgive my interruption. I simply wanted to provide my companion with some background so he can fully appreciate our hopeless position."
Onyx Face said,
"In a way, the older one has betrayed the younger."
Navy Face concurred.
"We are only tasked to kill you, old man, and anyone who stands in our way, so he will die because of your friendship."
"And who has betrayed me, if I may ask?" Orange Face leaned even further forward.
"A comrade of yours. Someone you trusted," Olive Face said.
"Someone you believed was on your side," Bright Red said. Then it flicked its thin forked tongue, tasting for Rolando's pain.
"Garibald of Gaul, your oldest friend."
"We knew about him already," Serge said. All 5 creatures reared back slightly and hissed. Rolando raised his hand.
"Of course it pains me to know someone I trusted sent the 5 of you to kill me, but it would hurt much worse if I knew why."
Orange Face leaned back over them again.
"Nothing more than simple strategy."
Navy Face joined its sister.
"You mean so little to him. He simply wants you to fail in your mission." "But it is a mission he sent me on," Rolando said. "Why would he encourage me to discover the source of the curse on this land if he wanted me to fail?"
"Arrogant whelp," Navy Face said, sneering more than any human face could sneer.
"You think you are special to him? You are not the first knight-errant he has sent here to die. By making you think you are working for him, you foolish knights tell him exactly where you'll be and what you've found."
Onyx Face joined in.
"You were only exceptional in that you survived the first attempt and disappeared for a while, forcing Garibald to send us to sniff." It licked its tongue. "You out."
"Is Garibald working with this Fenkum guy?" Serge asked. All 5 heads whipped in his direction, but none spoke, and it took him a second to realize they hadn't understood him. He tried again, speaking so slowly he felt like a recording set to the wrong speed. He even noticed he dropped his voice, like a person doing an impression of a stretched-out audio tape.
"We've never heard of someone named Fenkum," Redface said. "But he may also work for Garibald's employers." "Who is Garibald working for?" Rolando asked.
"Ah, that will be our final betrayal," Navy Face said. "You'll die knowing you were close to finding out something much bigger than you could have imagined."
It flicked its tongue. Yes, that one really stings, doesn't it, Lord Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi? And now, you die.
Surge spoke out of the side of his mouth. Time to unsheath our swords now?
Remember, Rolando spoke at Surge's rate, to the river.
The first of the Hanya's blades came swinging down, but it seemed to move in slow motion. Surge had time to pull Baganawatig from its scabbard and deflect the swing. Blue electricity crackled from his sword to the Hanyas, and he felt he could note the time the electricity entered the creature's hand, followed by the slight delay before the monster's already bulging eyes reacted to the shock. By then he twisted to one side and cleaved through the portion of the snake's body just above the car's roof rack. His magical blade sent another jolt of electricity through the monster, but the slash did no other lasting damage. The slice appeared, and a puff of ghostly green smoke trailed out in the sword's wake, but the cut sealed up just as quickly.
Sisters, the green-faced Hanya called out. This one has a sword that deals some delicious pain.
Its words were slowed to a drawl by Rolando's spell, but the smile in the sound persisted. Navyface had raised its sword to attack Rolando, but it hesitated and flicked its tongue.
Do you taste that? He didn't know.
"Ah," Redface said, its voice mocking with false pity.
This is another betrayal. The old man didn't tell him. So tasty.
They cannot be killed by men, Rolando explained. We cannot defeat them. But there is something they cannot do. And he motioned to the east with a tilt of his head. Surge almost said swim out loud, then caught himself and nodded. He launched himself between two parked cars, slicing along the side of Orangeface's snake body as he went, then blocking another blow from Greenface. The Hanya's deflected katana passed over his shoulder and into the car next to him, but not the way Koman or Po passed through solid objects. The roof bent slightly, and two of the windows shattered into pellets of glass before the sword carved a foot-long gash in the door, coming to rest in its center. Surge couldn't hurt them, but they could most certainly cut him in half. Behind him, Rolando followed at a similarly accelerated speed. Three of the Hanyas took swipes at his back as he ran, and he spun and deflected all three with a single S-shaped swing. His sword, Makawabide, did something Surge's Baganawati couldn't. Instead of shocking the monsters through their swords, Makawabide cut the blades of their katanas off where it met them. The thin but incredibly strong pieces of steel clattered to the pavement, tinkling like different bells because of their lengths. The three Hanyas all stopped to look at their clipped blades in comic unison, falling behind as Surge and Rolando ran away from them across the parking lot. Then the three monsters looked at one another, snarled, flipped the broken swords over into uneven knives, and gave chase. 3 long city blocks and the width of Tom McCall Waterfront Park separated the knights errant from the leap into the Willamette River. Though the spell Rolando had placed upon Surge gave the younger man greatly increased speed, now making him as fast, maybe even a little faster than his mentor, the Hanyas could keep up. Their motion was not as graceful as it had been as they'd slithered across the parking lot from the back of the U-Haul truck. Now they moved in spurts, striking as they launched forward, then falling back. But the men couldn't run flat out either. They kept an eye out behind them, turning and running backwards for a few steps each time they had to block another strike. The Hanyas were hesitant to launch themselves at Rolando. They knew he couldn't hurt them, but they didn't want to lose their swords. So they swung down at him, trying to slice him in half, but dodging back if he looked close to parrying. The one furthest in the lead, its face mimicking a bright red mask, took a different approach to Surge, waiting until he turned to face the park and attempting a wide swipe at his lower back, aiming to cut him in half in that direction. Though he moved at a superhuman speed, he'd only turned to see her spring toward him on her coiled tail at the last second. He didn't have time to rotate and block with Baganawatig. Perversely, his new speed gave him time to register his imminent demise and feel a profound disappointment. And then the 30-foot-long creature smashed into the previously invisible shield Rolando had cast to defend his young protege. Though transparent, the shield became visible as the Hanya slammed into it, the bright red mask revealing itself to be flesh as it smooshed against the solid surface. The rest of the monster followed, wadding up like a vacuum cleaner cord no one could be bothered to wind around the handle properly. Shocked, Surge slowed and permitted himself an accelerated "Ha!" before Rolando grabbed the shoulder of his shirt and hauled him along. At the second corner, the men couldn't afford to wait for the stoplight despite heavier traffic. Their speed allowed them to time their Frogger leaps through the passing cars, and they passed so quickly the drivers honked at them once they were already halfway down the next block, an afterthought of irritation. Then 2 cars crashed into the tail of one of the Hanyas, which the drivers had subconsciously chosen not to see. Rolando and Serge heard these impacts, which were not preceded by the sound of brakes, then an aftershock when one of the cars was rear-ended. These accidents would later be blamed on the local homeless population, or teenagers, or both, though the physical evidence wouldn't match a pileup caused by stopping for a runner. Serge and Rolando, and the drivers of downtown Portland, lucked out with the timing on the next 2 lights, crossing with traffic moving in tandem to their left, but a car did experience a nasty bump as it made a right and passed over the end of one of the Hanya's tails. This would be blamed on the city council's lack of attention to the pothole problem. As the men ran across the strip of grassy field toward the cement pathway and railing at the water's edge, they heard someone calling out to them. "Lord Rolando! Sir Sanchez! Over here!" Serge found the man just as Rolando shouted back, "Sir Stiesel! Hanyas! Jump into the river!" Sir Stiesel was clearly a fellow knight-errant and warrior mage, as evidenced by his glowing transparent armor, his raised sword, and his familiar. The armor wasn't made of conjoined bones like Rolando's, but looked more like traditional plate armor, and it gleamed so brightly Serge could see it, even though Sir Stiesel stood in the noonday sun when ghostly armor was most invisible. Through the armor, Serge could make out the man's clothes. A white button-up shirt open at the collar and with sleeves rolled up to the elbows, and burgundy suspenders attached to dark gray slacks. He had a short beard, even more carefully trimmed than Rolando's, and dark brown instead of the older man's salt and pepper gray. His facial features reminded Serge of the actor Stephen Dorff, though Serge couldn't remember the actor's name and just thought of him as the bad guy from Blade, though he knew he'd seen him in lots of other movies and had no idea he'd voiced a character in a video game Serge had played once. Sir Stiesel's sword was a bastard sword like Serge's, but with a more distinctly diamond-shaped blade, making its 4 faces shine dramatically in the sun. His familiar, a goat named Reckless Ken, stood atop the railing, precariously close to the rushing water on the other side, yet it poked its long, curved horns in the direction of the oncoming monsters, seemingly heedless of the danger. Like Koman and Poe, it had a skeleton visible through its flesh. Its skull had been removed and placed on the end of the pommel of Sir Stiesel's sword. But its horns were removed from the skull and remained attached to the glowing ghostly body. It looked at the approaching Hanyas and intoned, "Dang." "No need to jump in the river," Sir Stiesel cried. "I have come to your aid." Rolando was immediately skeptical, and not just because of the powers of the Hanyas. He knew Sir Stiesel had interacted with Garibald of Gaul in the past. As they neared the third knight-errant, Rolando said, "I do not mean to offend, good Sir Knight, but we cannot defeat these foes in combat. They cannot be hurt by any man." The 3 knights stood with their backs to the railing, pointing their swords toward the approaching monsters, each in his preferred stance. Rolando aimed Makawabide forward at the end of an extended arm like a fencer, and Serge held his with the hilt at waist height, the blade leaning forward at a 45-degree angle. Between them, Sir Stiesel held his straight up, parallel to his body, peering down either side of the blade. The approaching Hanyas spread out and formed a semicircle, 3 holding their hands next to their heads, broken blades pointed down to stab, the other 2 tenting their arms directly above their heads and holding their intact katanas back behind them, ready to strike down. Their half-circle closed slowly, the Hanyas' overwide grins clarifying they were not hesitating out of fear, but out of a desire to relish the moment. Behind him, Serge heard the billy goat say, "Well, I guess we're probably going to die." "Fear not, Reckless Ken," Sir Stiesel said, "and do not worry, brave knights. Reckless Ken and I did not come alone." Serge heard the splash behind him, then saw the shadow passing overhead. The figure landed in front of the knights-errant. She held 2 small knives pointed outward at her hips. One seemed to be made out of some kind of chipped rock, similar to Rolando's Makawabide, but a gray, rougher stone. The other was a very familiar pocket knife. She wore a skirt made of some shiny green woven fabric, and a matching shirt that covered one shoulder and was cropped at a rakish angle above her belly button in the middle, but as low as her belt line on one side and halfway to her armpit on the other. And her skin was covered with pink and teal iridescent scales under a thin layer of short white and black spotted fur. And though she'd landed on a curved tail, it divided into 2 humanoid legs as she rose up to her full height. The long curls on her head, bright green and blue and purple, moved on their own against the breeze as she turned and gave Serge a wink. "Callie!" he cried, first overjoyed, then worried. "Wait, there!" But before he could finish, Callie lunged forward, swinging both knives. The two Hanyas closest to her brought down their blades, one a full sword, the other a broken dagger. The monster's blades passed right through Callie like they were made of smoke, but Callie's slices cut deep lacerations into the serpentine lower extremities of the Hanyas. Both monsters screamed, and their sisters hissed, all five wriggling back away from Callie. "Hanyas cannot harm women," Rolando said. "Well, except for the individuals with whom their lovers cheated." He frowned hard and tilted his head to the side. "Come to think of it, I am not sure about the fine print regarding their lovers' relationships with OnlyFans models, but it is unlikely these women's lovers were Callie's subscribers, I suppose." He raised a finger, opened his mouth as though he were about to say something, closed it, shook off the thought, and then stepped forward and raised his hand like a child in an elementary classroom. "If I may," he said. Callie kept her eyes on the Hanyas, but the monsters dared to look back and forth from Lord Rolando to the Mursalki hybrid. "It seems to me we are at something of an impasse. You have been tasked to kill me and my companions. Callie here will kill you if you make the attempt. But I would rather not jump in the river while you get stabbed to death. And I'm guessing you would rather not be stabbed while watching me jump into the river. So if I may make a suggestion." He paused for dramatic effect. "You have all been betrayed by men, and now you serve one. Wouldn't it be pleasurable to betray Garibald of Gaul?" Orangeface said, "Of course it would, but—" Greenface helped. "We cannot turn on the wizard who raised us and bound us." "It is not in our power," Onyxface said. "Stupid old man. If we could do that, don't you think every man would beg us to turn on our master?" Rolando nodded. "I'm sure they would, and I admit, even with the aid of my familiar, I do not have the power to free you from Garibald's thrall. But just a few blocks from here, I have trapped a djinn. He would like nothing more than to betray me, and he has ambitions to build an army of half-djinn using child brides as incubators. I do not know all the rules, but his choice of female brides leads me to believe he qualifies as a man, though he is an elemental spirit of great power. So, if he has the power to set you free, and he can be tricked into doing so, believing the five of you will punish me for taking him captive, it is at least possible that, once you are all freed, you could betray him, then return to Garibald of Gaul and let him know how you feel about a man keeping women chained to his service." "How do you know we wouldn't come for you?" "I do not. You will be free to do as you please. But I am hopeful that these men, the Jinn Mukadi, Garibald of Gaul, and, for that matter, the wizard Fenkum, who currently keeps some number of Anhanas captive, will be more pleasing targets than the knight-errant who rescued you from bondage." The five Hanyas looked from one to the other. Then the one with the navy blue face shrugged, and the other four nodded. Orangeface looked at Rolando. "If the Jinn can set us free, we will go about our own business and leave you to yours, Lord Rolando de Santa Maria del Pi of Barcelona." "All right, this way." And then Rolando turned on a heel and began leading the group north along the sidewalk next to the river. Redface stared at his back and raised her katana. "Don't even think about it," Callie said. The Hanya lowered her sword and slumped her shoulders as she slithered behind the rest of the group. Reckless Ken remained on the top of the railing, balancing just for fun as it clip-clopped next to Sir Steezel. Serge sheathed Baganawatig and walked alongside Callie. "I wasn't sure I'd ever see you again. Thanks for the rescue. What have you been up to?" "Oh, so much, but you go first. You seem to have a lot you want to share. You're talking really fast." "Sorry," Serge said, making an effort to slow down. "Yeah, it's been a lot." Just then he heard Koman muttering as it made its way across the park, its ringed tail bobbing as it gallop-waddled as fast as it could. "Fucking stupid little red panda legs," it said, a word with each bound. "This is Koman Sawanarat, my familiar. Koman, we're safe, it's okay." "Yeah, I'll just keep an eye on the betrayal demons, if you don't mind," the red panda said. Then it stood up on its hind legs and threw its arms up in the air. "Well, who is this? You're pretty." "Thank you. I'm Callie, mermaid and Selkie." I'm Koman, Koman repeated, red panda familiar with stupid little legs.
I think there may be something we can do about that, Rolando said over his shoulder. I should have taught Sir Sanchez about speeding himself up. Perhaps the same spell, permanently applied to him, could also be applied to you, my dear. He looked at Serge. And we need to get you your armor. I was remiss to go seeking clues about the whereabouts of Fenkum without taking care of that first.
About this wizard Fenkum, Sir Stiesel said. That's who I've been investigating. And though I don't have all the answers I seek yet, I have made some discoveries I'd like to share with you. But let's finish this business with the Hanyas and the Jinn. Then I can explain everything I've learned in transit. In transit? Serge asked. Where are we going next? Back to Chicago, Callie said. Chicago? You'll see why. It's a complicated story. As the group of 3 knights, 3 familiars, 5 Hanyas, and 1 mermaid-selkie hybrid made their way north toward the condo Rolando had rented, they passed the apartment where, at that very moment, Benjamin and Chris were wrapping up a podcast interview. They'd had to warn the hosts they weren't allowed to talk about the specific details of their case against Megacorp, and the hosts had been gracious enough to allow them to gab about their shared interest in the collectible toys called Brick, without an S, even when plural, and always capitalized, which had been the provenance of the store Chris and Benjamin had owned, and which had been improperly seized by Megacorp. They'd had such an enjoyable conversation with the show's hosts that when they were invited to join them at this year's BrickCon in Chicago, Chris and Benjamin honestly agreed they'd love it. After clicking the button to leave the meeting, Chris turned to Benjamin. If I can get the days off, I think we should go. Benjamin hadn't considered it a serious possibility. Really? I mean, it would be cool, but can we afford it? Let me see about the days off and running the numbers, Chris said. She was very good at tallying up costs, a skill she'd honed managing the store. It still took some time. Making calculations like that isn't something one can do instantly, like, for example, while being kicked out of one's own store. But once she'd added it all up, though they couldn't afford to add a leg to visit Benjamin's parents in Cleveland, they could manage some cheap tickets and an inexpensive hotel for a few nights, and Chris's new boss generously agreed to shift some schedules around at her work to make it possible. Since schools were on summer vacation, Benjamin wouldn't be missing any substitute teaching jobs, and he always got a lot of writing done in hotel rooms, though he fell asleep almost instantly on airplanes and sometimes slept through the landing, lulled by the rumbling of the engines. The couple had already budgeted for a short trip to the beach to celebrate their wedding anniversary, and it felt even more appropriate to celebrate in Chicago, the first step on their trip back to Portland, when the couple had reconciled. Someday Benjamin wanted to return with Chris to Florence, the city where he'd proposed, and to take a palate cleanser trip to Barcelona, the city where they'd almost lost one another. Perhaps Florence for an anniversary, but never another anniversary in Barcelona, despite how much he still loved that city. For now, Chicago. They ran the idea by their lawyer because Megacorp would have a presence at BrickCon since they were one of the major sponsors, and the couple were trying to steer as clear of the corporation they were suing as they could. Their lawyer not only gave them permission, but encouraged them to go, on the dual grounds it would be good for their mental health and would provide an opportunity to thank some of the many people who'd been supporting them in their battle with Megacorp. Benjamin felt this gratitude fill a cavity inside him. He couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come in the last 6 months, not just in terms of miles from Barcelona to Portland to Cleveland to Portland and now back to Chicago, but from nearly divorced, destitute, homeless, and hopeless, so mentally broken he'd invented a knight-errant out of whole cloth to confront his fear of his cursed country. Now here he was, happily married, hopeful, and grateful. He knew the fight was far from over, and his experience made him fearful of the next twist and crash. But having so many people to thank produced in him a kind of purpose. He'd been running away for almost 2 years, a combination of strategic retreats and desperate panicked routes. And now he was moving forward, not into battle, but off to say thank you. Of course, Benjamin had no idea what Sir Stiesel wanted to show to Lord Orlando in Chicago, and what it would mean for the whole country. But if some small truths can be revealed, why not the big ones? Footnote. As a perfect illustration of the draft nature of this manuscript, this is the first mention of the product sold in Chris and Benjamin's stolen store. Of course, now that this has been established, this detail can be added retroactively to previous mentions of the store, such that the final manuscript will be more consistent throughout. In the same way, the Chris character went from being referred to as Benjamin's soon-to-be ex to being identified by name post-reconciliation. As to the particular products in question, the third-person narrator, though omniscient, is an incorporeal voice, and thus not a lawyer, since disembodied voices are not allowed to sit for the bar. In the narrator's layperson opinion, the employment of the term brick should serve for narrative purposes and adequately describes the kinds of collectibles consigned in the fictional character's fictional stolen store. Any resemblance to real products, corporate entities, or persons living or deceased are either products of the writer's imagination or are used fictitiously. If you are excited about this project, please subscribe on YouTube, or like and share on TikTok or Reels or whatever app you're on now. And if you're willing to support me as I craft this novel in serial form, please consider supporting my Substack or Patreon. I have some new subscribers to thank this week. Thanks to MyRxPro, Cosmic Christie Connections, Ezekiel Berman, and Baker Cordell, who've subscribed on Substack. To Jesus Hasselhoff, Forkunner, Guillaume Bordeaux, Kermit, Zachary Laborde, Kelly Nielsen, Bird Queen, Rach Stewart, Krishanka, and Charity Lewis, who've become patrons of my Patreon, and to the more than 11,000 of you who now subscribe to my channel on YouTube. That blows my mind, and I am so grateful to all of you. I like to give shout-outs to fellow creators, so if you're a Patreon patron or a Substack member, and you have a book or some other project for me to plug, please email NotAPipePublishing at NotAPipePublishing@gmail.com, and I'll mention it here on the show. Speaking of which, we have a sponsor this week. Duncan Wilson is the author of the novel Once Upon a Lane, a character-driven suburban Gothic slice-of-life story that follows the humble lives of the residents of a suburban neighborhood as they live and love, and about the house with the dead yard, a vacant lot that sits among their homes, inert and immobile, yet intimidating and terrifying to any who look at it too long. The children of the lane are not the only ones who are fearful of the anomaly in their midst. Every adult on the lane wonders why the structure still stands, with no known owner and no reason to be. The lingering question is not who owns the house, but why no one ever goes in or comes out, and why there are such ghastly noises emanating from within. Day by day, the happy people of the lane go about their tasks and trials, and day by day, the house with the dead yard seems a little more ominous, a little more intrusive, and a little less ignorable than before. If that sounds intriguing to you, it certainly piques my interest. I'm putting links in the show notes, so find that in ebook, paperback, or audiobook at one of the many places linked below. And thanks to Duncan Wilson for supporting the show. See you back here next week for Chapter 22 of Tilting at Windmills. Teaser: Rolando and Serge learn how Sir Steezel and Reckless Ken got involved in the case, and what they can reveal about the evil wizard Fenkum. Also, if you'll be at Brickworld, the non-fic me and the non-fic Chris will be there too. So, say hello.